Welcome to the Business of Coaching Workshop, episode 2. Today, we're going to build on the we're going to build on the cost price value business model that I introduced 2 weeks ago, with a focus on how to add value, and a topic that I've been thinking about for several years, that I'll go into in more detail. And then, based on feedback last time, we're going to end the session with homework assignments for those that are interested, and of course the Q&A. So first, I'm going to just recap the model, and then I'm going to go into a model for trust that I use, and then we're going to talk about how to trust as a function of time and how to build, grow, and repair trust. So just to recap real quick, 2 weeks ago we talked about the cost, price, value levers of a business model. And then in order to maintain profit, price must always be greater than cost. And in order for your customers to stay, they must perceive that the value that you're delivering in your product or service is greater than the price. And we talked about how often when you hear that a customer says they can't afford it anymore, a more useful translation as a service provider is to hear that as they don't perceive the value being justifying the price anymore. And the difference between the value and price is often referred to. You might hear people talking about brand value, goodwill. You'll literally see on balance sheets. And what I want to introduce here is the idea, and I talked about it briefly last week, the idea that, particularly as it applies to coaching, that I believe, at least I have my mental model, that trust is what is really between perceived value and price. And so our job as business owners is to constantly look for ways to reduce costs, to increase profit, and also to increase value so that you can increase price, decrease churn, and of course, increase profit. So 7 years ago, as maybe even over 7 years ago now, I went to a leadership conference that my company sent me to. I was working for what was formerly, long story, Roar, that turned into Goodrich, that was bought by United Technologies, is now owned by Raytheon. But long story short there is that it was a big company, but it started out as a relatively small one, and they invested a lot into training their management. Both Goodrich and United Technologies impressed me a lot at the time with how much they spent on training their leadership team. And most of the time, I've gone to many of these leadership workshops before, and they often kind of feel like a waste of time, bit of a boondoggle. But they're kind of fun to get out of the office. This one actually ended up arguably changing the course of my life. One, because it introduced me into, or it prompted me to really start thinking about trust. And two, I was having lunch with the presenter, and she was asking me about what I do. And I was, running a factory at the time with about 100 mechanics building aerospace components for the 787. And I also mentioned that I was coaching on the side. And there was something about the way that I was just talking about what I did for my day job and how I was talking about coaching that, she kind of looked at me, put her fork down. She's like, well, how come you don't do the coaching thing full time? Which I thought was funny to be asked that question at a leadership conference that my company was putting on. She was a consultant. She didn't have any dog in the fight, but that also got me thinking about making a career change. The thing that prompted me to think about trust was that there was a quote that she referenced in the presentation that I think it was a Colin Powell quote, which ironically, depending on how you view Colin Powell and his legacy, you could argue he didn't really live up to his word here. But politics aside, one of the quote was, I think, useful in that he said, trust is the foundation of leadership. And for some reason, that just really stuck with me. And the direction, the homework assignment from this workshop at the time was to start paying attention to trust. Like just as an idea, like when you're talking to your employees in this case, um, pay attention to trust. Like, what do you notice? And that sent me down this rabbit hole, months of thinking about trust. What is trust? Do my employees trust me? Why do they not trust me, or why do they trust me? Because I was having interactions as a leader. I was the general manager of this facility and responsible for all operations and everybody there. And I would have interactions with people that I didn't understand. And as I started to pay attention to trust and think and study about what it was concretely, I'm an engineer. My brain likes to deconstruct things into concrete variables that I can control. So I basically did exactly that with this idea of trust. And I actually came across, it started as a TED talk that I saw on trust that was basically a repackaging of a meta-analysis study done in 1995 on the idea of trust, particularly within the context of business. Um, and so basically, these researchers took all of the studies on trust that they could find and compiled that into a definition of trust, and then three variables, three components of trust that they found within all the research to be common levers or common attributes of what goes into trust. And the first piece, the key to understanding trust is defining it. And their definition of trust was the willingness to be vulnerable with the trustee to be, excuse me, the trustor to be vulnerable to the trustee, and then choosing to take a risk with that person. So the example they gave in the TED talk was, you know, the presenter talked about going skydiving, and that if you're going skydiving for the first time, you're not trained, you're strapping this person onto your back and throwing yourself out of a plane. So there may be no better definition of trusting somebody than to be vulnerable, for your life to be vulnerable, and for you to take a risk to say, I think this person is going to get me down to the ground safely. And it's another good example because it's context dependent. You might trust Joe to be your skydive instructor, but you might not trust him to be your barbell coach. Same is true for us. Many people are effectively trusting us, and as I'm sure you've all experienced, many of them have a lot of fear around what's getting under a heavy load, doing a weight that they've never done before, working through an injury, training when they're stressed. All of these things are very personal positions of vulnerability in which your client is trusting you to help them navigate their strength training, or whatever type of coaching you're trying to do. And while I think it's very applicable to coaching, you can also apply this mental model to any relationship. And while I've been thinking about it for 7 years, I continue to fail frequently at managing trust with people. But one of the things that I think is really cool that we'll go into shortly is that it gives you a model for thinking about managing relationships, whether it's with your friends, your family, or your clients, that is not a binary I trust you or I don't trust you model. It's one that can change over time. So we have a definition for trust. The next thing that the paper talked about was the meta-analysis basically distilled all of the components of what influenced somebody's decision to take a risk, to be vulnerable. And they came up with three major buckets. Again, the meta-analysis, if you go into it, they took hundreds of papers and they all kind of had slightly different word choices or elements. Some of them had several elements, some of them had two or three, but they bucketed them into these three categories. And the first one was ability, and this is perception of the trustor's perception of the trustee's ability. which in other words, can the person that I'm trusting deliver on what they say they're going to do? When I go strap myself to my skydiving instructor, do I believe that they can get me safely to the ground? When I sign up to get coaching from my barbell coach, do I believe that they have the skills and the ability and the experience to help me accomplish my goals and get stronger? The second piece was integrity, or in plain terms, will they? So, will they do what they say they're going to do? And if the instructor says they're going to pull the chute at 4,000 feet or 2,000 feet, whatever it is, do they do it? And do I believe they're going to do it? And important reminder: this is a loop that's happening in constant real time with each interaction that the trustor has with the trustee. It's not fixed in time. The last piece that they found was a bucket they called benevolence, or do they care? So these are, again, the perception of the trustor to the trustee uh, is a very subjective thing. And, I think this one is potentially the most important over the long-term relationship, in that it's the one that will change the relationship the fastest. Um, I think, and we'll go into this in the next slide, I think ability is the first impression. Integrity is sort of what sustains the relationship. And then benevolence and whether or not they think that you care about them is the one that will make or break the relationship. I've experienced this personally, where there was a moment where I perceived that my coach no longer cared about my programming enough, and it was instantaneous. It was like that moment was the breaking point. I think that can happen with the other two. I just think that the benevolence one is a very emotional decision that can happen quickly. Okay, so we take those three and stack them on each other to get what this is my mental model. This I basically put this together just to visualize how I think trust happens over time. In that, like it said in the previous slide, trust is the sum of the trustor's uh, perceived ability, integrity, and benevolence of the trustee, the person they're trusting, and that fluctuates over time. And so in this drawing, what I'm showing here is that initially the like let's take a strength client. The strength client's perception of my ability as a coach is going to be very high as a component of their decision to trust me or hire me as a coach. They are also going to perceive my integrity and my ability to, and I think that's probably the second biggest. And then the support or relationship, I think, is the smallest component initially. Those all add up to give you some total perceived or total perceived trust, yes, that the client has for you. Now, my goal as a coach is to build or maintain that trust over time. I want to be constantly investing in delivering a product or service that improves the client's perception of my ability, my integrity, and my benevolence towards them. And what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that I think ability kind of tapers off to be less important over time. There are, and what I'm showing with these bumps is that there's new opportunities over the course of a relationship where ability becomes, it, it pops up again. Like, let's say somebody has an injury or changes in their goals or their priorities. That becomes a new opportunity for you to show maybe more skills in terms of programming or rehab or whatever specialization you have. Let's say they want to start competing in a different sport, and if you have experience in that, you're able to bring that to the table in your programming. Accountability and professionalism, I kind of show here as being relatively constant. Now, the ones that I'm trying to, what I'm implying here with these dips are that there are times, I think every coach or anybody in any relationship has experienced this, where you do something that erodes trust. And this is where I think there's an opportunity to move away from a binary perspective on trust and focus a bit more on taking that emotional reaction that I think anybody feels. Like if take a small example, you're late to an appointment or you're late to a Zoom call. Unfortunately, I do this to Mac more often than I care to admit, but I personally feel that as a erosion of trust in our relationship. And instead of just beating myself and flogging myself about it, I look for the opportunity to demonstrate accountability and professionalism or integrity to try to repair and grow our trust. The last piece, benevolence and support in the relationship side of things. I think this is really where you can shine as a coach over a long period of time, get to know their family, get to know who they are as a human, anticipate their needs, respond empathetically to setbacks or accomplishments. These are the things that I think that the video feedback can be a game changer because you can convey so much more human emotion with a video feedback, with that just little picture in the picture, that they can actually hear the enthusiasm in their voice. They can hear the empathy in your voice. They can hear, what your thoughts are, things you like, things you don't like. It's a ability to maintain more of a conversation. And that's just to me a subset of what I try to build into Turnkey Coach, are tools that enable the coach to seamlessly demonstrate ability, integrity, and benevolence in every single feedback video and every single interaction on the app, whether it's the birthday reminders, the missed workout notifications, which we do have the option to turn those off, but man, I think that's a huge opportunity to demonstrate integrity and benevolence. The day after they miss a workout, you send them a note, just checking in, see how things are going. Even if all they say is, no, hey, coach, no problem. I just didn't post it for the day or whatever. That's a small 2-second investment on your part to convey that you're there paying attention to you, care about their training. So over time, my goal, and this is again going back to the first model, the first value piece, this is what I think, how I concretely think about adding value or building trust in order to add perceived value to my clients' customer experience over time. So we're getting a little over the 15-minute time mark, but here's the homework assignment for this week. 3 questions to ask yourself and think about. How do you deliver your service so customers perceive your ability, integrity, and benevolence with every single aspect of your product or service? That could start from onboarding all the way to severing the relationship when they move on. Do you leave them with a trust building experience? Because many times circumstances change, that customer might not be able to continue with you next month, but 2 years down the road, a year down the road, they might come back. I've experienced this many times. So you want to think about the entire life cycle when you're talking about your service. Second question, what do your clients value about the service that you provide? Get real specific. We talked about that last week, making sure that you potentially explicitly ask them what they get excited about, what concrete things do they value, and then you can take that and organize that into these 3 buckets. So another reason I like this model is that it helps me sort of filter and organize what my client's perception of my service is, so that I can kind of simplify and streamline what it is that I'm doing in my coaching practice. And then the third question, how can you be more intentional about building, growing, and repairing trust? We're going to talk about this very tactically when we get to the cost model or the cost arm of the model. But I think it's something that you can start to sort of pay attention to even now. Like I said, the first step from that workshop I went to was to pay attention to trust. So I'll give you a small practical example. Some days I would come into the shop, it's super early. You had to be at the shop by like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And some days I would come in super caffeinated and I'd be jacked up, excited about the day, super positive and cracking jokes. And other days I would come in and the coffee hadn't kicked in and I would be kind of down or I'd be stressed out and I would be reactive. And I noticed that I would get confused on the days when I was hyped up, that people were sort of like I could tell there was a trust issue there when I started paying attention to it. And when I started using this model, what I came to realize is that it was undermining the integrity, because a big part of integrity is consistency. And if the service that you deliver or the demeanor that you have or the attitude that you have changes from every single day or every single workout, you are subconsciously or unintentionally undermining or eroding trust. Um, so that third question is really prompting you to step back and kind of think about what are things that you're doing that might be unintentionally eroding trust or potentially unintentionally building trust. But how can you take a step back and think about everything that goes into your service and be intentional about those that are building and growing trust? And if there are things that are eroding trust, how can you be intentional about recognizing them and then repairing them? So, three questions to ask yourself as you are ending this new year. Hopefully, everybody had a good Thanksgiving and is getting ready for a good Christmas holiday or end of the year, and launching lots of new growth and product services next year. With that, Mac, I'll let's see. Are we going to try to do our facilitated Q&A?